Got it. Okay. As we start, as a land-grant institution, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign has a responsibility to acknowledge the historical context in which it exists. In order to remind ourselves and our community, we will begin this event with the following statement. We're currently on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piancashu, Wea, Miami, Mascouti, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. It is necessary for us to acknowledge these Native nations and for us to work with them as we move forward as an institution. Over the next 150 years, we'll be a vibrant community inclusive of all our differences with Native peoples at the core of our efforts. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Allyson Tintiangco-Cubales to the College of Education at Illinois as part of the Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series. Professor Tintiangco-Cubales earned a PhD in education from UCLA and is an award-winning distinguished professor in the College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University in the Department of Asian American Studies and an affiliated faculty member in the Educational Leadership Doctoral Program. Author of 4 books and many, many articles, Professor Tintiangco-Cubales has developed teacher education models centered on students' humanity and educators' connections with communities to advance social justice. She has worked with school districts to co-develop ethnic studies, social justice, and Filipino language curricula, is the co-founder of Community Responsive Education, a collective of educators, community leaders, and wellness practitioners. Here at Illinois, the work of Professors Tintiangco-Cubales and Duncan Andrade on community responsive pedagogy has been an inspiration for revisions to our middle school teacher education program. And we're excited that this afternoon, our students in the undergraduate program will have a chance to have dialogue circles at the Seal Center for Design. Last year at ARA, I was able to see Professor Tintiangco-Cubales' presentation at the Drawing from the Well documentary screening. This is a powerful film about youth wellness during the pandemic, showcasing the journey of young people, their families, and educators who supported them. I learned this morning that this film will be available soon, and I hope you won't miss it. It's very, very moving and powerful. But this spring, Dr. Tintiangco-Cubales will be inducted as a 2024 ARA Fellow, a most deserving honor for exemplary scholarship. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Tintiangco-Cubales today, who has been in Champaign before, but we're so excited to have you here today. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. That AERA thing, I'm still trying to process right now. I was just telling your dean that I've never felt comfortable at AERA. So when they said you're a fellow, I was like, oh no, what does that mean? Like, what do I have to do now? You know, like, okay, sorry. You might get a little comedy act. Depends on my mood right now. What an honor to be able to be here with you all, hang out. I love the hangout part. This part, let's hope they get something out of it. But I really think like hanging out with you all, if there's a chance and you want to sneak a little one-on-one conversation, I think there's time for that in between stuff. I'm not really doing much in the office that they've given me. I'm staring at the wall. So come and hang out with me. I'm from ethnic studies. I think that's really important to talk about, and that's really where I'm going to be coming from. I, of course, am trained like many of you in education, but ethnic studies is really my academic home. And so I'm going to kind of come from that perspective. I realize there's people online. Hi, everybody online. I've switched some of my activities to include a little bit of online-ness. So I'm hoping it'll work out. Okay. Um, oh, look at Allie knows what's up. Like, I'm like, how this is gonna work? Okay. I don't know if that song will play. Let's try. I'm scared, actually. Let me use this. I'm going to play a song that was written by an organization, actually, several of the members of the organization that I helped start, called Pinay and Pinoy Educational Partnership. I've since retired, but I still take pride in them. So, oh, it's not going to play. We'll listen to a little bit if it lets me. Okay, it's okay. I'm not going to sing it for you because then you'll be running out the door. Like she didn't come here to sing, right? Okay. But later on, I'll try to play it for you. It's a beautiful song. It's from an article, not from, it's from a musical that we wrote as an organization. Instead of Into the Woods, it's called Into Our Hoods. Yeah, and the students really took pride in that piece. If you get a chance, there's an article that's called Into Our Hoods. So today, I'm not sure where it's going to go and where I'm going to land. Of course, like many of you, I over prepare. So we'll get to as many slides as I can get till you tell me to be quiet. Is that cool? I also like to play. And so there might be some moments where we're actually talking and playing around a little bit. We'll try to do some online version of that, just so there's a chance to have some interaction with the kind of things that I'm thinking about. Some of this is new. I'm going to build on an article that I think a lot of people got circulated, that Jeff and I wrote together. Jeff Duncan Andrade and I wrote together, called Still Fighting for Ethnic Studies, and it's focused on community responsive pedagogy. I'm going to build on that today. The title is Culturally and Community Rooted Pedagogy. Rooted is the new concept in that culturally and community responsive pedagogy piece. So this is also what education can learn from ethnic studies. Yeah, I love the smiles because y'all know what I mean, right? Okay. And I feel like I'm somewhere in between. I get to sort of toggle back and forth between ethnic studies and education. Sometimes in the ethnic studies building, I'm the pedagogy person. And so I think really important that we're in communication with each other, and sometimes we're really not. And I think important that we start to have those real conversations about, what is what can we learn, beyond the walls of the School of Ed? Okay. So because I'm a teacher and I can't help myself, there's a lesson plan. And so we will do some rituals at the beginning. That's C1. C2 is critical concepts. So we're going to go over some of these concepts. Some of these you already know, but then maybe I'll lend a little perspective on some of these concepts. And then we'll do some collaboration around what does it mean to be rooted? What does it mean to be radical? And then some closing dialogue. I'm hoping I get to C4, but you know how it goes. Okay, we will try our best. And then the last thing, we just really want to come back to that question, what can education learn from ethnic studies? Some rituals. I do a lot of ritual in my classes to set tone, but it's ritual that I've learned from my family, rituals that I've learned from indigenous communities, rituals that I've learned from my brothers and sisters across cultures. And so today, my focus is just also, you already honored the indigenous people, but also, the pain, and also that we're settlers here. And I want to just acknowledge that as part of the work that we do. And without acknowledging that, we're not being honest. And so I just want to be very mindful that I'm not indigenous to the US and I'm not indigenous, to this place in which those people, and you've already mentioned them, are indigenous to. I do come from a place where the Ohlone peoples, particularly, the Ohlone peoples in the East Bay of the Bay Area. And that is really important for me to acknowledge. I also have put up here some people that we've lost in ethnic studies since COVID-19. Some of them you can see are super young. And so it has been a painful period for us because as we lose people for all kinds of reasons, it impacts the way we approach the work and life. And unfortunately, just last week, we lost our associate dean, and she was fabulous. And she was a steward of the ethnic studies building and college. So we have a College of Ethnic Studies. That's a really important note. So we operate as this entity. We're the first College of Ethnic Studies in the nation. And I think there's one more at Cal State LA now, but we're all still very happy, like that we have a college in San Francisco and a college in Los Angeles. And the associate dean, you may or may not know her, but she wrote a book called Machete in Hand. About Chicana lesbians. And so I would encourage you to read her work. She also is the author with her partner of Decolonizing My Diet, some book that you probably didn't realize who the author was, but you picked it up because it had the words diet and decolonizing, and you're like, what is this? She wrote that. I had brought some high school students only a few weeks ago, and they got to meet her, and she came running out with her book, and she was like, take a picture with me with my book, and they were like, what book is that? And she, just casually talks to them about, their lifestyle. So it's beautiful. We lost her to a stroke. She was only 58. And so I just want to acknowledge the necessary process in which we are sustaining our lives and ourselves as we continue to do the good work that y'all are doing. I also want to acknowledge an ancestor who is, this is a mural at San Francisco State University. We helped put this up right next to the Filipino mural. Filipino and Palestinians have a relationship that goes back many, many generations. And so I want to acknowledge how important Edward Said has been in my thinking. I read the book Orientalism, and I was like, I cannot understand. That's important, that sometimes you read text and you don't understand it. But over the years, learning about how Orientalism then applied to not just the Palestinian experience or the Arab experience, but also to the Filipino experience was really important to me, and how we're treated. So that is a framework that I use. I'm not going to go in depth on the framework today, but important that I acknowledge that he's an ancestor in the work that I've been doing for like 30 years. 40 years. I'm going to read this quote from him because I want you to know where I come from without me explicitly telling you. How's that? We cannot fight for our rights. I'll read this way. We cannot fight for our rights in our history as well as future until we are armed with weapons of criticism and dedicated consciousness. This is really important as scholars, that we have to be able to go deep and think deep. Humanism, which comes not just from Edward Said, as all of you know, right? You've read Paulo Freire's work, I'm sure, and many people who talk about humanism. But humanism is the only, I would go as far as saying, the final resistance we have against the inhuman practices and injustices that disfigure human history. I come from a place of humanization. And right now we are in a world where that is not valued. And so just want to acknowledge how important it is, like that as I'm talking about ancestors, I am also talking about the many ancestors that did not have to lose their lives. And I'm sitting with that as I go and travel across the coasts, as I go and do the work all over the place. I feel like I need to honor that the ashes are quite literally in the air, and that it is not, I'm not at all, what's the word? I'm not at all responsible if I don't acknowledge that. Edward Said's daughter is an Instagram friend. And I oftentimes look at her work, and this last semester, I was able to teach the memoir of Edward Said alongside his daughter's memoir. Wildly different. I would check it out, the two memoirs, and how they are not the same people, but how as generations pass, how we have the same problem of practice, in the work. So check out their work. I want to also bring in descendants. This one's mine. You're like, all of those are yours now. Kind of, yes. We raise as our community raises together. And in unfortunate situations, we lose them early. And so one of these four we lost to gun violence this year. I'm sorry, in 2013. And so I talk about descendants as also our ancestors, and important that I bring them in as my ritual to share with you before I even talk about the work, because this is why I do the work. I am visiting my daughter tomorrow in New York, so can't miss that flight. Allie was like, "Are you really going to leave 6 a.m?" I said, "Yes, I'm leaving at 6 a.m." C2, I'm already going into my lesson plan. You see, I did the rituals already. C2 is critical concepts. And so I'm quite literally laying out an ethnic studies lesson plan. That's how I do it. Start with rituals, setting the culture of the space and the tone. And then I go into critical concepts, and we'll do some collaborative work. And then we'll close with some dialogue. Critical concepts. What am I going to talk about today? Oh, I am going to talk about this. I'm going to focus on this concept of rooted. But do you notice that a lot of ed theory loves to use the word critical? Oh, I got some laughs. Critical this, critical that. And not at one point did someone say what critical meant. And then at some point, someone said, let's use cultural because, like, we want to be good and, like, make people feel good, like they're included. So they started using culturally this, culturally relevant, culturally sustainable, culturally cultural. I used cultural too. I still use cultural. Did not define it. Even community. We you know what? Let me use community instead of cultural. It's a little bit better because then at least I can see people when I'm thinking about it. Still didn't define it. So my goal today is just, even if I get this far, we're doing something. Is to start to really tackle the discussions around what do those words mean that we're using as adjectives. We have been using these adjectives in education for am I wrong? You know what I'm talking about, right? And probably almost everybody who's written an article in this room has used one of those critical, cultural, or community as your adjective for your work in some shape or form. Okay? Me too. I'm saying this about myself. I'm not critiquing everyone else without critiquing this. Yeah, and I have made the mistake of not actually defining these. And so I'm going to kind of come from an ethnic studies perspective and making sure that we actually tackle this. Okay, so we're going to review a little bit. I don't know if anyone read the articles. I think some of you did because you talked to me this morning about them, but I do want to review a little bit, and then I'm going to go review, extend. Yeah? Okay. This is the diagram that doesn't show up in the article because they took it out, but this is actually what it's supposed to be in the article, like so that you see a diagram that these are the domains of community responsive pedagogy and how important each of these are. Like that we must really think deeply about what is our responsibility as educators? What is our responsibility as ed leaders, right? What are the kinds of relationships that we have with each other? I was talking to your assistant professors this morning. I feel like I said relationships 100 times. What are those relationships that you have with each other? What are the relationships you have with your students? What are your relationships you have with yourself? Yeah. Relevance. And relevance became a very popular word with one of our, profound folks, Gloria Ladson Billings. My gosh, there's so many. But Gloria is the one I think of when I think of the concept of relevance that she has now transformed into responsiveness. So these become the domains of community responsive pedagogy. But I want to ask the question, how does this shift when we infuse ethnic studies, decolonizing pedagogies, culturally rooted pedagogy, maybe this concept of radical that I'm going to talk through a little bit. It's a scary concept, but I want to talk through it with you all. But before we do all of that, I want to kind of think about this concept of rootedness. Dolores Delgado Bernal this last weekend's like, Allyson, I think it's a compass. Forget the triangle. So then I put the compass up and she goes, can you make it turn? I was like, not right now. Slow down, lady. We can't quite make everything move. So no technology made it move right now, but there's something about the four corners and then also the four directions that made sense. And so this concept of rooted is something that I'm going to go in on a little bit. And that to be culturally and community responsive, you have to be rooted. I think we like to do the surface work. It feels good. But there's a difference between ethnic studies and multiculturalism, where ethnic studies requires us to be rooted, to have relationships with people, to really feel responsible to other humans. And then also make sure that we feel like that's part of our work, our responsibility as people, not just as educators, but as people. So we're going to do a little online playing here. The online folks, I'm going to give you the instruction online, and then I'm going to give the instruction to you all. Online, you're going to use the chat, and we're going to play. Okay? Don't do anything yet, that obviously. In person, you're going to pick a partner. So someone you're sitting next to is fine. You don't have to move around. Pick a person A and pick a person B. Are we ready to find a partner? Everyone find a partner. Me too. Okay, are we ready? Online people, you gotta pay attention a little bit because I'm gonna try my best to like give the instruction at the same time. Hybrid, not fun. Okay, we're gonna play. Play is important. Yeah, play is how we got our intellectual prowess. Okay. So this is inspired by the game Medium. I didn't even know what it was, but some ethnic studies, organizer was like, let's play Medium as a drinking game. But okay, we'll try. So this is for online. You're going to write one word that represents culture, but you're not going to press send yet because then it will confuse everybody. Hold on the send until I say 1, 2, 3. Okay? So in person, you are going to think of one word that represents culture to you, but don't say it. I heard someone say it already. Don't say it yet. And you're going to look at the person or try to look at them. Some people don't find that comfortable, but just at least try to like be with the person that you're partners with and think of the word. We got a word, everybody? Okay. And then we're going to say it at the same time after I say 1, 2, 3. Ready? 1, 2. Look at the person. They're looking at me. Look at me. Oh, okay. Again, 1, 2, and online, when I say 3, you can press send. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Wow, that was like a musical thing. Okay. Wow. Okay, questions. Now this is my questions, and Amy, you might need to help me with seeing what's online if they actually did it. Because I don't know sometimes, right? Did anyone in the room share the word with your partner that it's like the same word? Okay. Oh, that never happens. No, okay. Now what do I do? No, all right. As a teacher, you're like, that's not supposed to happen that way. Okay, so let's start here. What was the word that you chose? Oh, both of you said tradition. And that was yours. Anybody else say tradition? You should have been in this group. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right. And then what was the word that matched here? Ah, okay. Any matching words? Anybody say food? Okay. How did that happen that they can put pictures? That's an amazing chat function. All right. Okay. So we got tradition and we got food. Okay. So no one else said food. It just happened that you were talking to each other. All right. What are some of the other words that came up? Okay. How many of you said family? All right. You got some votes out here, should run for office, Okay. Is it strange? No, that's like too judgy. The fact that people didn't, what does that say? That people didn't have the same word. We have a few, right? But like, what does that mean? Absolutely. Culture means different things, and and it means different things to different people. We quite literally use that as an adjective for all kinds of stuff in education. We're like, are you being culturally relevant? Are you being culturally responsive? What does that mean? That we have just created an entire like body of work or school of thought around culture. And when this room can't agree, not that it's a competition, but cannot agree on a one word that we all agree upon, right? Do you think family is part of culture? Okay. All right. Okay. Do you think tradition is part of culture? Okay. What else? What did you all say culture was? This group right here. Oh, okay. Anybody else say love? I would say love. Anybody say church? Okay. Probably a bigger room, you would have gotten some, both of you. And then, okay, you got close, but those mean different things, love and care. And then you said what? Understanding. That's key. Understanding culture. Like, and it is almost like a cheating question, a cheating answer too. Because you're like, I'm not going to actually say, but important that culture is about understanding and being understood. I know Lydia's work is dealing with belonging. And it's so interesting because when I think about belonging, I think of those words right here. And I'm like, okay, so when we say belonging and we're saying belonging in school, like what are we asking them to belong to? And how do we avoid an assimilationist frame to get young people to think feeling belonging is good? But what if it's like I have to give up all of my culture to belong? And that's uncomfortable. That's an ethnic studies frame. So that's like sort of the difference between looking at belonging without an ethnic studies frame that then is pushing the school to create opportunities for belonging, but not actually looking at what do we need to shift at school versus what does a child need to shift. So I think important that all those things sort of deal with belonging, right? But how necessary it is to rethink how we imagine who is responsible for that. Yeah. I love belonging discussions. We'll have more of those later. Okay, let's try some more. Oh, wait, we didn't define culture. And that's usually what happens is we just have this really good discussion and then it's like, what is it? So culturally rooted pedagogy, I'm going to throw up. I'm not going to throw up. I'm going to press click. I'm not going to press click either. What is it? I'm going to put it on the screen. Culture is a way of life. Yeah. That's a basic definition. In sociology, we used to have an acronym called CAR legs. Does anyone know that? Okay. Well, maybe it was just my professor who said, CAR legs, everybody, customs. I forgot what all of them are, but like, literature, language, something, legs. But all those things, including church. Church is actually one of the elements of or spirituality or religion, right? Like those are some of those things that fit under CAR legs. But I want to look at culture slightly different. And so some of my early work that people don't read is focus on these three frames: cultural past, cultural production, and cultural power. The culture, when we talk about culture, we are actually talking about history, as our historian would know. Because people are like, oh, what's your culture? You're like, what is my history? What is my story? That's not the same as culture, but in a relationship, it has, with culture. But the word culture is not history. It's also not the same as community. What's your culture? Like, I'm Filipino. Like, what does that mean? Right. So then It's what is culture? And so I think of it as in these three ways where all cultures have a history. They all have a legacy and it's complex. And just because I may look like, my Boricua cousin here, we're not the same, even though we were both colonized in the same war, right? Or even another Filipino. We might have some things in common, I'm assuming, but probably not everything. Our parents, okay, actually, they might know each other, but like okay, their parents don't know each other, but you never know. AJ, we'll have the conversation later, but I'm saying just because he could take a picture, we could take a picture and look like cousins doesn't mean we're the same. Actually, I don't even know if me and my cousins are the same. So I want to kind of pull back a little bit that there is this sort of larger cultural past, to this idea of people, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're all the same. And sometimes we create programs, we create educational, like the curriculum that is the same because we think people are the same. Cultural production. Is culture static or dynamic? That was the uncomfortable face that a professor gave. Oh. It is. It's dynamic, right? But we live in a society of staticity, right? This weave is from the Ilocos. That's static. Of course, they cut it up to make it look all modern, but that's a static understanding of what that weave means. And that weave has a story about how when you look at it, you start to get a little dizzy because you're literally looking into the mirror of yourself. Okay, now everyone's going to stare at my jacket when I'm walking by. But understanding that that's actually a static idea or story, like that then becomes dynamic as we begin to think of it in postmodern times. Yeah. Important to think about that. But what's sometimes we get stuck on is we actually create things based on staticity. We call it data. Well, that's happening to those students from whatever many years. So we got to do this. But we don't actually spend enough time talking to the students that we're actually serving. And that can cause some dramatics, right? And then also that cultural production isn't something that happens in the past, it is happening right now. And really valuing young people and valuing students means we have to value their agency to create culture. I love youth culture, but my youth, different than their youth today. Sometimes I say like a lyric and they're like, ha. And I'm like, oh, I thought it was totally relevant. Hip hop, and they're like, I don't even know who that is. Who is that Mary J. Blige? Oh my God, that's a good one. Wow. Okay, you get what I'm saying? Like sometimes you have to really question who am I in this, culture? Cultural power. There is such thing as cultural work, cultural power, medicine that oftentimes gets overlooked because we were taught, because we got these degrees, that somehow we're that doctor that thinks that we have the medicine for all these people or the knowledge for all of these people. But actually cultural power, every individual has cultural power. Every community does. Some are just valued and dominated over others. Yeah. Okay, more. Let's do more. You're like, she's almost done, right? Okay, I don't know why I did that, but okay, pedagogy, and really important that I define pedagogy as the art of teaching and learning. Sometimes people think of pedagogy as methods, how do I teach? That's important, but for me, that's the last thing on the list. That I feel like it's important when you're thinking about pedagogy that you're interrogating all of that before you get to method. You're interrogating what is my relationship to power? What is my purpose? What is the context in which I'm teaching? And then get to the content and the method. Sometimes we want to go methods first, especially the young teachers. They're like, oh my gosh, I came up with the best lesson plan. Everyone's doing group work. I'm like, that's wonderful. What are you teaching? Oh, but I'm teaching World War II. I'm like, okay. So what are they doing in the group work? They each get a section in the book, and then like all of them do a skit. Wonderful. What are they learning? World War II, according to the book. Period. I'm like, it's got to be more than that. Do you get what I mean? Like, so when I think of pedagogy, I think really, you've got to really think about all those pieces when you're doing it. Sorry about the weird thing there. And then to me, when I think about all of this, and this is where culture and community collide, is cultural perpetuity. Have we heard those words before? Okay. Y'all heard of Maslow? Oh, this is nuts. Maslow hierarchy of needs. Yeah. On the top of the pyramid is what? Okay. So he borrowed with permission from the Blackfoot Nation, that pyramid. And the top of the pyramid of the Blackfoot Nation is not self-actualization. What is it? Community actualization. Actually, it's not. The top of the pyramid is not community actualization, it's cultural perpetuity. It's the fight to keep our cultures alive because they've been destroyed. That's the top of the Blackfoot Nation pyramid. Yeah. And so part of this is reclamation or redemption of the need to think about cultural perpetuity because people have taken it away. And then the goal is community actualization, of course, part of it. Okay, let's do another one. This time, let's do community, okay? Ready? Look at your partner. Everyone online, get ready, to say your word. I'm gonna say 1, 2, 3, and then we'll go to what is community? Yeah? Don't prep your partner, okay? All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right. Let's try it. Let's see. Anybody get the same word? Of course not. That's going to be worse than like trying to get culture on the same word. Am I right? Okay, what are some of the words? There was something really amazing happening, and like you were like acknowledging that word. What was the word? Okay. Well, there was some like empathy, wonderful thing, solidarity, whatever we want to call it at that moment. People and support. Okay. Yes and yes. What else did we get? Safety. Ooh. Did anyone else have safety? I guess that counts. There's a relationship between safety and responsibility. Okay, let's hear some more words. Just throw them out. Support. Oh, we got some, yeah, across that way. Okay, what else? Farmer's market. I love me a good farmer's market. That's how my people survive as farmers. Y'all come see my musical coming out next week. Coming. You gonna come, AJ? I'm a producer. I'm not the actual writer. So think of this word community. What are some of the ones that came online, Amy? Support is a likely one, huh? Yes. Okay, okay. Cool. No one said ethnicity. No one said race. Am I right? No one said gender. No one said class. No one said neighborhood. Interesting. Don't you find that interesting? Like, I think it's interesting. We got people. That's as far as I got, with as close as we could get. But how interesting that our choices are related to like the idea of what do we do for community? A lot of them, not everybody probably, versus what is community? Because when we create something like community responsive blank, we're thinking race, ethnicity, and all of those things. How interesting, no? That we have, it's not intuitive. Okay. So let's look at community. So this is my definition. Don't try to find it anywhere. And it's not, I don't think it's even published anywhere. But anyways, a community is an interconnected group of people that share common backgrounds, cultures, experiences, sometimes ancestors, spaces and geographic locations. That's the most common one. The spaces and geographic locations, people really get, when they say community, they quite literally mean neighborhood, practices, interests, ideologies, and or goals. How do you create community responsive pedagogy without thinking about what community actually means? Because we do it. And again, this is the same quote, yeah? I like to look at it as I got personal community, local, and global, that you belong to multiple communities in kind of those circles. And we may have to make choices about what we're going to commit to each of those spaces. To me, these are relationships. When I think of like personal, local, and global, I think of them as relationships. Am I the same person? I am. I don't know about everybody else. But I try to be the same person, but all these spaces have different needs. So I need to think about what my daughter needs tomorrow, right? Versus like what, like coming out to speak with all of you, what you all may need at this particular moment. Yeah? Okay. All right. Let's keep going, yeah? We're on C3. I'm getting pretty far. How long do I have? 2 minutes. Someone will say 2 minutes. How are we doing on time? What time is it right now? Oh, good. That's amazing. All right. That's pretty good, right? And then we'll go talk during our little reception. Okay. So what does it mean to be rooted? Oh, my fave, Angela Davis. Yeah. She says radical simply means grasping things at the root. People are scared of the word radical because it's been weaponized. You're so radical. I'm like, thanks. But really important that it actually has been weaponized in a way where people actually are scared to speak. They're scared to say quite literally, I have a commitment to humanity, because they're afraid they're going to get attacked. And radical really just means grasping something at its root. Radical, even in math, is root. Correct, right? Oh, that was a good math connection, Georgiana. Okay. I don't know where that came from. I didn't even think that hard about it. Okay. This is a big block quote. I don't like to do these, but then this is a publication that is not really, I think I might have shared some of it, but I wanted to make sure that I talked about a few things. So I really draw from ethnic studies and, of course, culturally and community rooted and radical pedagogy. Really important to note that those really value indigeneity, and they value people of color. They also values, like this idea of communities of color. And to be rooted, whatever position we hold, there's a need to be in conversation about perpetuity of cultural practices that really are rooted in decolonial medicine. And that's important. We're scared. We're doctors, some of us, and maybe going to be, but we're scared to talk about medicine. Isn't that funny? Because that's what they do over there in the hard science doctor. A real doctor, as some of my family members would say. Yeah. But our role as educator doctors or doctor educators is really to listen to the heartbeat of people. But we are afraid to allow ourselves to think about our work as medicine. So I'm encouraging you to think about that and how powerful that is. Something we can cure things that those doctors cannot. Not that it's competition, So I'm just putting us to reconsider that word medicine. It's something actually that we're doing. Yeah. we can also make mistakes and have malpractice, okay, yeah. Important. Along with this decolonial medicine piece, we want to think about here's the stuff I'm providing, but I also want to think about the critique of systems. So, critique and imagining beyond the systems that are toxic to us. We are try really hard to live within these systems. That's why I always get scared about belonging, because I'm like, oh, how does belonging actually critique the systems in which I'm trying to belong to or have my students belong to? So there's a real need as we do community work, or I think the word engagement was one of the things that was part of this lecture series. Like, we need to think about how are we shifting the system in which we are trying to engage, not just fix ourselves within the system. Because the system is not healthy for many of us. To be quite honest, it has been violent to communities like us. So this is where the whole cultural past, power, and production come in, that it's really important that we resist some certain things like over-essentialization of students. Like, we think all Asian students don't talk. That's not true. I think it's really important to reduce appropriation, so taking other cultures and taking it onto ourselves, and then preventing genocide. How important that is. Physical, cultural, whatever kind of genocide that is happening, we have to be in opposition to it. If you're rooted in ethnic studies, you are absolutely against genocide. The rootedness is central to the notion of radical pedagogy. And this is kind of the breakdown of radical, and I'm going to go really deep into each of these in 5 minutes. Reflect on your roots. So I love playing with words, and so you'll see acronyms all over my work. So I use RAD. I'm totally from the 80s. RAD was a very important word. Yeah, some of you? Okay. Reflect on their roots is the R. Analyze oppressive systems and then determine themselves, or really rooted in self-determination. Okay. So we'll start with the R. So I love asking questions, and I think that in my more recent work, everything is about questions. I try to answer some, and I try to use these questions as a way to really interrogate, what am I doing in my work nowadays? I think a question during the earlier presentation or earlier fireside chat was, what do you do after you get tenure? Then you come up with more stuff to talk about. Ask lots of questions. So when I think of this idea of reflecting on your roots, I'm really asking, what's your story? It doesn't matter if you're a person of color or a white person, you have a story. Sometimes I feel like there is this racelessness happens when you're a white person doing work in communities of color. No, we got that wrong. You have a story. You are a person. And you also, and sometimes, hold power. Acknowledge it. Instead of putting it way behind you, I'm not a person anymore. And that's actually one of the main things I see as problems, where then it becomes, what's the word? Missionary, becomes savior complex. It becomes, I had a colleague who said, look at me, I'm modeling how to give up my space for people of color. I said, that's very nice. Are you taking care of yourself? Because I want you to continue to do that work. Right. So I feel important that we acknowledge that. What is your story? Important, who are your ancestors and what did they experience that shapes, influences, and impacts your life today? How does this shape your identity and communities' identities? It's important to acknowledge that. Where do we learn our story? From whom do we learn our story? And how does that inform our perspectives? I used to do an exercise where I would ask, where did you learn your story? And all the white people would say school, and all the, people of color would say from my mom, from my grandmother. And I'm like, that's very clear that people of color are not learning their story in school. So you really want to interrogate, where are you learning it? And when something gets valued in school, then you become valued. Right? And that becomes really a key kind of distinction between why it's important to know where you learn your story. And then what are the forces and conditions that resulted in your family or ancestors settling in the US and in diaspora? How did y'all get here? Some people struggle because some of their records of their ancestors have been destroyed. So let's try to piece it all together. Yeah, important that you really understand your story. That's the very first thing in ethnic studies. Even unit one, it's like unit one, learn your story, right? These are some of my colleagues. I like to bring Filipinos in the space because oftentimes their research or their scholarship doesn't always get recognized. Everyone has a story. Kiran Macabao, right? Macapugao from Southwestern College. She's getting her PhD right now. And then Dr. Radaus Magbual says, we're all narrative beings. So I don't want to assume that all of us realize this. So I'm going to say it. Y'all have a story. We've been taught that being selfless is being down. And I think that we have to somehow rethink that. Especially, let's just say selflessness, for example, as women, being a mother, for instance. You've got to give up your entire life for your children. You're like, no, I don't. Georgiana's face is like, mm. But that's what we're taught in the concept or the patriarchy of motherhood. Or else you're not a good mother. I think sometimes in education, we're like, you have to give up your whole life. You have to be that teacher. Really? But then what am I modeling for my students if I don't take care of myself? So important to consider that we all have a story, that we all have stories that we make to about ourselves. So take care of yourselves. That's like my theme right now. I'm going to kind of list a few things that kind of are important to consider when you're reflecting on your roots, because it's easy to kind of fall out and just, think, oh, everyone has a story and that's it. Actually, no, I think important to consider that when you're thinking about everyone has their story, that we resist essentialism. What I mean by that is that we make sure that when we look at people, we don't assume what their story is before we even get a conversation with them. Yeah, key. Resist appropriation. Do I need to go there? Probably not. Don't appropriate, other people's story for your own. Karen is actually indigenous in the Philippines. Like there's an actual population that's called IP, Indigenous Peoples. I'm not part of that. Like my parents are Batangueña and Ilocano. I don't want to appropriate their stories for my own. So the specificity becomes important and not appropriation. Acknowledge contradictions. This idea of kwentuhan, talk story, are methodologies. So if your student comes to you and say, I want to gather some stories of my people, you say yes. That was like a funny thing because people actually used to say no. Counter storytelling is healing. When I tell you my cuento, it's healing. Your story builds identity. Cultural identity is a protective factor in your wellness. This has been now proven in EdPsych. Thank you, people. Okay. Cultural perpetuity is an act of self-love. If you want some resources, if you're like, where is that in EdPsych? I will show you. Okay. This is one of my best friends, my best friend, Dr. Don Buholana Mabalan. Unfortunately, we lost her in 2018 to the water in Kauai. She left us, though, with a lot of amazing work. Some of the work I ended up picking up and some I can't. But she left us with these really important questions in ethnic studies. Who am I? What is the story of my family and community, and what can I do to make a positive change and bring social justice to my community and the world? Some people actually use these as essential questions for ethnic studies courses. I built on this, and I'm going to show you a quick. It's not comfortable, but it's also not responsible if I don't share a little bit of my roots. Ethnic studies saved my life, period. Exclamation mark, always. That was me. My student drew this of me. Yes, I went to a school that was American high school. That is the name of the school. That's not some, it is the name of the school. And I was angry, but I have to remember, and like whenever I'm teaching teachers, I'm always like, remember they were a child once. Yeah, who has a history and who has parents had a history. I was the first one born here from my entire family. And then I went to school with a lunchbox that smelt like fish and got made fun of. And then I didn't want to be Filipino anymore. I just wanted to be something else. Um, and then I started acting up in school, didn't do well, started hanging out in the parking lot more than I did in class. And this Allyson came through. I did like to dance. And then somehow ethnic studies found me and I found ethnic studies and then I became that person. My student drew this. I have to like show it to illustrate. She's actually a middle school teacher now. Counter cuento, or my counter story. This is the real pictures. Look at my hair though, okay? I was actually always very good at doing hair. That is a perm. You remember those? Okay. This is my dad. He's smoking a cigarette, teaching me how to ride a bike. Did not learn how to ride a bike, learned how to smoke cigarettes. Janitor. Yeah, he was a farm. He picked flowers before he was a janitor. He was also a busboy at Montgomery Wards or Monkey Wards. Yeah. 80s, I was a dancer, so I would get on this cheerleading team, song girl team. By basketball season, I would be kicked off because of my grades. And then somehow they gave me a megaphone. And just to date me, this is the boycott on grapes, United Farm Workers. Yes, I'm that old. Okay. This guy was my first professor of ethnic studies at Ohlone College. He changed my life. He was a brown beret, as you can see there. And he really changed not just my life, but a generation. I thought I was Chicana. That's okay. He told me I wasn't. I was like, no, I am. You're not. Don't get it twisted. You're not Chicana. I'm like, but I have all these Chicano friends, you know? And then he's like, no, 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 no. He hands me this book, America's in the Heart. He's like, read it. And I didn't read. I didn't know. I mean, I knew how to read, but I didn't read. That was the first novel that I read from cover to cover, realizing it was a collective history of Carlos Bulusan, who was a Filipino farm worker. I brought it home and my mom was like, oh yeah, you know, your dad picked flowers in Isherwood, or, you know, and then she started talking about like the different things that happened. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know any of this about my history. That one book opened up a world for me. And he opened up a world for me. He also helped me transfer from Ohlone College to UC Berkeley. And then I became a poster child. They used me. This is 25th anniversary of the college. At the 50th anniversary, I was their keynote for graduation, and I was blessed by the Ohlone chief that was shepherding the entire class. Then I went to Berkeley and fought because people were not getting tenure. For some reason, there was this thing where Filipinos weren't getting tenure. And so this was one of the first tenure battles that I was involved with. It's so interesting because the words faculty diversity are here, and I'm like, oh, I end up becoming that. Like everywhere I go, I feel like I'm diversity. This is my community. This is Pinay and Pinoy Educational Partnerships. This is actually an older photo, so it's bigger than this. But I figured I would choose this one because we're outside and it's fun. This is me with the babies. It's a K to college program that I helped create. There was no programs for Filipinos in the area that dealt with schooling. So this is what we created. It ended becoming a pathway for some people to become educators. They're amazing. The people who have come out of PEP, they ride hard. And they are scholars, warrior scholars, however you want to describe them. This is where I realized that what I needed. Like, you know, sometimes you're like, what do you need? Like in your current moment, I needed them as much as they needed the program. Yeah. Okay, I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go kind of quickly on the A and the D. That was supposed to be a funny joke for people who have toddlers. A and D? No, okay, that's not funny. It's the stuff you put on a baby's butt. Okay, anyways. All right, analyze. Analyze oppressive systems. We need to be better at this. And we also need to think about all these questions. What are the systems that have been oppressive to the liberation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color? How, in what ways do anti-Black racism, settler colonialism, and other modes of power relations actually impact the work we do? We are not immune because we have PhDs or that we're doing good work in these communities. In our relationships, how are we actually interrogating how we treat people and what our positionality is and what kind of power we hold? How can we re-examine power relationships with a radical intersectional and structural and analytical framework? That means like including things like how do we actually look at empire, diaspora, colonialisms, all of things that we really do in ethnic studies. How can we bring that in education to interrogate the ways in which we serve communities? Neoliberalism and capitalism, the list goes on and on and on. And then, how do we really do this? How do we shape the way we analyze? I probably don't need to share the video, but if you want to know like the history of ethnic studies, like look at the video. People fought for ethnic studies. Ethnic studies is the only field of study at the university that was fought for by students, that became a discipline. Students wanted this. Why? Because they weren't represented anywhere else. And the fact that ethnic studies was fought for actually impacted all of the work. Like ethnic studies precedes critical race theory. It precedes culturally relevant pedagogy. It precedes all the stuff that we think we invented in education. But actually, it happened way before. And ethnic studies was not invented at the university. It was invented in Indigenous communities. It was invented, in Black communities. It was invented prior to it hitting the university. So I think really key that we think about like, what are the roots of my work? Talk about the real legacies of your work. Oh, let's play. You will see it's multiracial. 1968. 1968 strike initiated by the Black Student Union and the Third World Liberation Front. You will see all those organizations that were part of the Third World Liberation Front. So important that we look at the goals: access, relevance, community. Oh my gosh, that sounds like a program in education. It's rooted in ethnic studies. Ethnic studies' origin story is, it really shapes its purpose, that people fought for it. People quite literally lost their lives, livelihood. Some people didn't finish their college degrees so that the generations after them could actually have a degree or an actual program, curriculum that reflected them. But side story, and I can share more later, but like some of them came back years later and like, hey, Allyson, can I get my degree? And I'm like, let's do it. So there are people who came back generations later to get their degree. Ethnic studies, just so it's clear, it's really about safe and brave academic spaces that center the intellectual traditions of Native peoples and communities of color in the first person. Think about who we're citing in the first person. And then also practice theories of resistance and liberation to eliminate racism. Important that eliminate racism piece and other forms of oppression. The purpose of ethnic studies is collective liberation. It is about collective liberation. It's about freeing all people from oppression. And sometimes my guilt comes through in this, like I have to think about what that means in a larger context. The fight for collective liberation is in and beyond the classroom. And that every child in that classroom is connected to a community. So when we talk about community responsiveness, we need to think about where are those young people rooted? So these are the main values of ethnic studies. This is rooted in 1969, but we started doing some work in San Francisco Unified around these. And so just listen to the words: liberation and freedom, self-determination and sovereignty, critical consciousness, humanization, community actualization, solidarity and unity, wellness, wholeness, hope, love, and respect. Probably the list could be longer. But knowing that these are the central values of ethnic studies. And so when you're thinking about your work, like what are the values? Like when you think about education, what are the values? This is a scope and sequence that's being used by different, teachers in ethnic studies, but I wanted to kind of show it so that, like, oh, when I'm teaching my students how to do a scope and sequence, it really starts off with this idea of shaping space. We've kind of done some of that today, yeah? Self-identity and knowledge of self, stories of communities, systems literacy and critical consciousness, social movements against oppression, solidarity, self-determination, and collective action. Again, I have this issue with acronyms and alliteration. What are Allison's S's? No, okay. I'm going to go to this last one, the D. Determine and do take action. What types of action need to be taken both to determine your actualization, but also determine community actualization? What does community need? And how do you know? We have a tendency to think we know what the communities need. And this is, like we've done some major damage with creating particular gaps or name gaps, like achievement gap. But then we have put so much power into that notion of achievement that we haven't even thought about how toxic achievement can be to people. Okay, that's for later on. That's for happy hour. Okay. This is one of my favorite questions that actually, I should attribute this to one of my former students who's now a professor, Ed Kuramang at Dominguez Hills. How do we learn how to ameliorate problems without perpetuating further harm? Like the achievement. Okay, let's fix the achievement gap. But then we have now just told all these people that their self-worth was based on the achievement that is based in a grading system that was in the 1700s. Right? We know this, right? That grades were rooted way, way back. Okay, so how does ethnic studies shape the way we analyze and critique oppressive systems? This is one of my colleagues, Joyce Salas. She says activists are essential workers. During COVID-19, there was a whole push to really define what essential worker was. And as a daughter of a janitor who worked in a hospital, my dad was an essential worker. When he would go out to protest, him alongside nurses as activists, to make sure that they were getting their rights fulfilled during COVID-19, those activists were essential workers. And so the work around activism and the work around taking action means that you are doing essential work. This is a fun one, solidarity. People like that word. But I think important to think about, like, how do we go from symbolic to transformative solidarity? There's some really great work with the DESI community, like where they have defined this idea. If you just look it up, transformative solidarity, the DESI community will come up with their framework. Act locally and globally, also personally. Resist American myopia, that we are the center of the world. America, like myopia. I didn't even know what myopia meant. Many, many moons ago, someone brought up that word. I'm like, I like that word. It means nearsightedness. Like we get so focused on America as the center of the world. Community organizing is activism. Cultural work is activism. Radical teaching is activism. Critical leadership praxis is activism. So even if you are holding an institutional position, you have the right to be active in this work. And then self-love is activism. For some reason, educators struggle with this one. I'm like, come on, we need this because we have to model it for the people in which we are working with. And then we need to go from awareness to activism. It's nice to be aware of things, and it's nice to post things on Instagram and repost, but what are we actually doing to address the issues in the world? Okay, there will be opposition. I didn't make this flyer, okay? My former student made this flyer because I think it's important for me to share this with you, that all this work that I've described has been attacked. For all the stuff that I've said, people actually feel like this work is criminal. I'm trying to find the right word to say there. And so I'm actually, I lost a contract. I lost two contracts. I lost a contract at the beginning of the school year from Pajaro Valley Unified School District. It's located in Watsonville. And mind you, my husband's family is from there, and we're farm workers in Watsonville. And our community has experienced anti-Filipino riots in Watsonville, the long history in Watsonville. And we were having a good old time, and it created a wonderful framework that if you're interested, I'll show you. We got attacked. Yeah. I got attacked. And they called me anti-Semitic. Because I talk about Palestine does not mean I'm anti-Semitic. I think it's really important. I really believe that there is something that has now created the turn. So there are some new definitions around that. And I think really important, and actually would fight against anti-Semitism just as fast as I would fight against any other oppression. But because we say we want a free Palestine does not mean that I'm anti-Semitic. So I just want to acknowledge that. But that's what they got me on. Of course, this whole project never talked about Palestine, but they were thinking this thing that maybe I was doing or feeling out here in the world was impacting this work. Fresno Unified, which is then the third largest district in the state of California, I was working with them. We were having a great old time, came up with a framework that was localized, was supporting all their ethnic studies teachers, including administrators. In the middle of the year, in November, or end of November, they sent me an email. Due to public concern, abundance of public concern, we cannot continue your contract. Yeah, so I got thrown out of Fresno. When I say me, I'm actually talking about multiple consultants that I then employ to do the work. So I wanted to be very upfront and tell you this part of the work, because I want you to understand that although it sounds all beautiful and humanization, we are getting attacked for doing the good work. And it's frustrating. But so as someone who comes from ethnic studies, we not only are educators or organizers, and so it's necessary to then fight against these things. So there are some lawsuits that are coming up. And I think during the session earlier, I was saying that I'm not alone in this one. So far, Palestine Legal has like over almost 600 cases of people being attacked or being deemed anti-Semitic, doing just things like this, or talking about even critical race theory. And so I just want to be mindful that I'm honest that, like this work is dangerous to people in power. And this work, makes people feel uncomfortable, and I think we have some work to do in our education communities to really think about, like, what are we willing to risk? So it wouldn't be fair if I didn't give that warning, that the work may create a situation where people don't feel comfortable. So I'll leave there. Let me, one more, I think, closing dialogue, just a reminder, like what can education learn from ethnic studies? Is there anything today, and we can have this discussion later, is there anything today that you're like, oh yeah, I really want to bring that into ethnic studies? I'm sorry, I really want to bring that ethnic studies into education. And what else, can we do, like to really think about how we can be better, like as humans, as educators, and then how can we be rooted? We don't want to be the people who are doing research on the community. We want to root ourselves in the community so that we can do research with the community, regardless of what methods you're using. So, okay, everybody, thank you.
Dr. Tintiangco-Cubales for coming here, and we're invited for the reception. Thank you.